In every movement, there have been activists who have fought tirelessly for racial justice.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
In this series, we dive into the lives of activists who stood on the front lines of two pivotal eras of the Black liberation movement, the Civil Rights Movement.
The church is always supposed to be the safe sanctuary if you're sitting in there. But we were amazed while we were in there.
And the uprisings following the tragic death of Mike Brown.
We've seen officers respond in such a heavy way that dogs out, tanks, tear gas, M16s, like this was Iraq.
For these activists, what was there to gain? Or, better yet, what was there to lose in their fight for freedom? On this episode, the movement, past, present, and looking into the future. Welcome to I Bear Witness, Freedom Fighters on the Front Line. I'm your host, Tiffany Lee. And today we have with us Jamala Rogers. Jamala Rogers is a respected community organizer in St. Louis, Missouri, and an influential strategist in the Black liberation movement. Her focus is on addressing structural racism, economic disparities, and gender inequalities that are manifested under racial capitalism. Jamala hosts Voices from the Battlefield, internet radio show at the Black Radio Hall of Fame, and is a co-host of Black Work Talk. Jamala is a featured columnist with the award-winning St. Louis American and the author of several publications and books. Her book, Ferguson is America, Roots of Rebellion, was re-released for the 10th anniversary of the Ferguson uprising. You can find out more about her at jamalarogers.com. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me and inviting me. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. So we start with the question, how would you define a freedom fighter?
So I would define a freedom fighter as somebody that is going to fight against, it's almost like what you said in the intro, against the structural systems that keep people oppressed. And so, because some people, when I thought about the question, think they're a freedom fighter, but they actually are fighting to maintain the system. So when I think about freedom fighter, I said maybe I need to clarify it a little bit more. It's like you're fighting against the systems that are oppressing the vast majority of people, not fighting for some entity. Because I mean, the word just is being used so much, and so you're fighting exclusively for the harm that's being done based on systems of oppression.
So now I need you to go more into that. Now you said some people think that they're freedom fighters, but they really are fighting to maintain the system.
Well, for example, the people that I think about is the folks who stormed the Capitol on January 6th a couple of years ago. They consider themselves freedom fighters and patriots. And so they did what they thought they needed to do, but in essence, they were going to be actually maintaining the status quo, as opposed to, transforming the system that most of us are under.
Yeah, I never considered that. Wow, that they would actually consider themselves freedom fighters rather. I mean, I know they don't think that they committed treason like I believe they did, but I never thought that they really believed that they were freedom fighters.
Well, if you're fighting and it's not, you don't think it's treasonous, then you think you're a freedom fighter.
Right, exactly. So, you know what, and then when you think about that, when you think about the fact of Black Panther Party and everything like that, how they were perceived almost as treasonous by having these ideas of what a revolution should be and how it should happen and that it should happen. So, wow, that's
and then you look at their 10-point platform, it really was about dismantling the systems of oppression. Right. So how they became public enemy number one is based on how J. Edgar Hoover looked at what a freedom fighter was, and he saw them as a threat to national security, meaning white folks, their security. And so, but really, I would consider them definitely freedom fighters.
So you began in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
What
yeah.
made you get started?
Well, I
in the
think,
movement?
I was raised in the 50s, and there was a lot of, things happening there. I mean, there was such seismic shifts in this society based on the challenges against racial oppression and the systems of segregation. So, you're watching Dr. Martin Luther King and what he's doing. You are, at the end of the 60s came the Black Power movement, but first it was the Civil Rights movement and the mobilization of tens of thousands of people, not just black people, but the allies of black folks who also saw the systems as being oppressive for the majority of people. And so, you're paying attention, at least I was paying attention to that, and, seeing things happen in my community and wondering, like, why is it like this? Why? I was a kid, was very curious, so like, why? And so I saw that there was definitely some inequities. I didn't come from a family that was politically active, but I did a lot of reading. I was a very avid reader as a kid. And so some of those things just like kept pushing me towards that. So, there was a rebellion in Kansas City where I was born and raised that had to do with the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. So, that was one of 99 other cities that went up in flames. And so then it was like, that was really a breakthrough for me that this is not going to get any better, and what side will I be on? So when I went to college, I think one of the first things I did was sign up for the Black Student Association and got involved with that.
So you said it was a rebellion in Kansas City.
Yeah, it was in all of the cities went up in flames. And so I think that was the simmering that was happening as the Kerner report aptly cited. Like, you can't have all this inequality, all this injustice smolder in year after year after year with no resolution, no respite. And so I think in most of the urban areas, people were just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And then when you have a leader like Dr. Martin Luther King, who advocated nonviolence,
right?
Who was the very essence of nonviolence. Right. And this is how you treat a person that's telling everybody else to calm it down. We can do this a different way. And so I think for a lot of people, that was just it. I mean, there's always, and this is just for me being an observer of what happens in this country, there's always a spark that's going to get people mobilized and outraged. And 10 years ago, it was the Mike Brown shooting, right, which, who knew that was going to be the spark? Particularly in Ferguson. I mean, we've had several, police shootings in St. Louis and had not ever had that kind of response. There'd been a response, obviously people are outraged, but to have a kid, be in the streets of Ferguson in a hot August, afternoon was, I think, a bit too much for people to bear. But, we hadn't seen anything like that in St. Louis in a long time.
Yeah. And I think that you're right. I've talked to people, and I'm just wondering what made that be the thing, because from my understanding, there was a lot going on regarding police brutality and young black people being killed by the police before Mike Brown, like in that era. Can you give us a little background about what was going on at that time? So and this is what I tried to answer. That was the question young people were asking me on the streets of Ferguson. Why Ferguson? Why now? And so the book, Ferguson is America, Roots of Rebellion, really tried to give a historical context about why now. And again, it's the simmering that happens over time. And the fact that in most cases, not necessarily so much with the Dr. King assassination, but it's always been a police shooting that took people, whether it be the beating of Rodney King. I mean, that thing is like, because they occupy our community in a certain way, it's like the resentment and the outrage is always there just under the surface. But one of the things I point out about St. Louis is St. Louis, because of white flight, you started having these various municipalities, which was another question people would ask
outside of St. Louis. Why in the hell do y'all have 100 municipalities?
Yes, exactly.
And what I have to explain is that was the white flight, initially white flight, folks wanting to have their own thing, get away from black folks, and so they started their own government. Of course, black folks moved west and north, and so they would come and join the folks that had moved. And so then they had to keep moving west. We
now, out in Wildwood.
Yeah. So Chesterfield. So now it's like really, really west, because basically St. Louis is landlocked, and so you have to just keep going in West County or North County. And the migration pattern generally for black folks has been north, and white folks have been south and west. So all these municipalities, you can, and this is what I say in the book, you can go 5 miles and hit 10 municipalities.
Yes.
And most of them will be hostile to black folks. So what you were doing in the 70s and 80s and even some of the 90s, where you were going around trying to, re-navigate where you need to go through, because, some of them were worse than others in terms of stopping, harassing, beating up, and so one of the organizations I belong to and helped to found, the Organization for Black Struggle, we would often be called to places like Jennings, places like Florissant, that were experiencing like really ugly kinds of harassment by the police. And the thing that I think really helps people to understand is when Ferguson happened, you then start to look at the demographics.
Right.
So how is it that you have a majority black population, but you have an all-white city council, you have an all-white school board, you have a predominantly white police? I mean, what? And somebody texted me to say, Jamala, you all got an apartheid situation there, right there up under y'all's noses. Now, I knew Ferguson was probably getting to be predominantly black, but you don't always keep up with the actual demographics. But I did not know that the government was still basically all white. Because then I would be saying, why didn't black people say, wait a minute, hold on, we want to be a part of this too. Yeah, I want to run for this. My kid is in this district. I want to be a school board member. So that part was a little bit surprising, but I think it also speaks to the framework about what's allowable by black people in this region. And I can only describe it as the specter of the Judge Taney ruling around Dred Scott, that there's no rights that black folks have that white people are going to respect. And you see that playing out, not just with black folks in terms of having internalized that, but you also see it with white people. And so the policies, laws, all of that just sort of helps keep that in the container. And then when somebody goes outside of that, then they get targeted.
That makes me think about, when you say that, that makes me think about basically, after Ferguson, we got kind of a lot of things happen here as far as black movement goes. So we had Wesley Bell that was brought in. We had Kim Gardner. We had Cori Bush come in, Tashara Jones. We saw this black leadership, and we were so proud, right? It was like, finally, our voices are being heard. But then there's been this regression since that time, right? So Kim Gardner was summarily just ushered out the door. Pushed out the door. And now Cori Bush, the same thing, pushed out of the door. So I guess I wonder about that, about these ebbs and flows that happen.
Yeah, and I think we can see over time that there's always those ebbs and flows, but part of the ebb and flow also is what I call the white lash. Some people say black backlash. I say white lash, because every time there's movement forward for black people or people of color, then there's a white backlash. And we are still feeling the results of an Obama administration, because people never did want that to happen. And so So right after he was out, here comes the backlash. So that's how you could have a January 6th. I mean, people like, we taking back our country. Y'all had that black president up there, and that's going to be the last of that. Right. So again, I always think about there are no rights that black people had that white people are bound to respect, and that was codified in law, you know, by the highest court in the land. Right. And so you can't not think that this is not going to have an impact on race relations here in this region.
Yeah, I do think about that, because when Obama was elected, within a year of his election, you had the Tea Party develop, right? So the Tea Party was this far right wing, what we thought was far right. And I remember
now they look moderate.
So I remember actually speaking to a Republican at that time. It was an older white man who was a Republican, and he was like, yeah, I don't know that those people, those Tea Party people, they aren't Republicans, and they'll get no foothold because, you know, they aren't real, you know, they're not a real group. And now it seems like the Tea Partiers and the people who are even further right than them have taken over
the Republican Party.
Yes, I mean, they are the people who got Trump elected 2 times now, right? They are those people. And you're right, it's some of that, like you said, white lash that happened. Is like, who do you think you are to come in here? But this happened all over the world, right? It didn't just happen here. You had the Brexit that occurred. Was it in Germany for a minute? They were looking at a right-wing candidate. In Paris, they were looking at a right-wing candidate. Didn't win, but
no, it's a global, like, you know, white supremacist kind of movement that's going on. That's, you know, anti-immigrant. That's, you know, anti-folks of color. So, you know, in some places it's fairly prevalent. So I would say, to the extent that the society that is happening in are vigilant and mobilizing for when it happens, then you can keep it in check. But it's there, and I would say particularly for Germany, who's been very vigilant since the Nazi times. Really, the people there just, you know, they just like, no, we're not standing for that. But, you know, at a certain point, people still have the, you know, civil and sometimes constitutional right to voice their opinions, no matter what it is. But as long as you're not hurting people physically, you know, you might hurt them with words, that's allowed. So there's a certain amount of the free speech that then infects other folks, and next thing you know, with the World Wide Web, all this stuff goes fairly wide fairly quickly. Right. And so I think we're looking at a global movement that really is not going to be healthy for the planet.
Right, and I would agree with that, and it's sad in a lot of ways, because I think it goes back to somewhat of, you said, like the fear that happens, and some would say, because, you know, in order for Obama to be elected, a lot of white people had to vote for Obama, right? But, you know, some would say maybe even the uprisings kind of made some of those white people that voted initially for Obama a little afraid too, you know.
Especially when you have a narrative that keeps stoking that, you know, look at them, they're going to be coming your way, crime, blah, blah. And crime really in this country has been going down for 30 years, but yet, and I keep saying, that's not my statistic. You know, you can go to the FBI. This is the other folks that are saying this, but yet, you know, police departments and other folks will keep stoking that, like, you fear that, you know, these black teenagers coming your way. I mean, the whole predator thing. Yeah, it is. It can make people scary, and I mean, even black folks are scary. You know, I'm scared to go out. I'm scared to go to this neighborhood. Yes. Well, you're a prisoner in your own, not just in your own neighborhood, but in your own home. And what is that really freedom? So, you know, I think we have a lot to look at when we see, for example, Project 2025 has been very explicit. 900 pages of explicitity about what's going to happen, and some of that has been unrolling, you know, even before Trump was elected. So when he says on day one, immigrants, mass deportation, you know, I can't help but think about, you know, when there were slave catchers And, you know, if you didn't have your papers, then, you know, you going back to somebody's plantation.
Right.
But the
Even
other
if
thing
you're
about
free.
that, even if you're free, and, you know, 12 Years a Slave was based on a true story. So you may get rounded up with everybody else, but you were born in this. And so I'm just thinking about how that's going to work. And the expense of it all is going to be on taxpayers, because none of those corporate people are going to be paying for that. In fact, I could see some of them saying, well, I'm all for the mass deportation, but I need my gardener, I need my housekeeper, I need that, so don't mess with them.
Right. I need a carpenter. To come and
Yeah,
give me cheap labor.
that roofing,
Yeah,
I
and
don't
what
mess with
about our
my roofer.
agricultural
There you
system
go.
that might fail if we don't have.
Yeah, all the migrants that come in there. Because
Exactly.
everybody that's a migrant is not even an undocumented person. So this whole term of illegal aliens just really irritates me. So undocumented means a lot of things, but mainly if somebody's looking at somebody that looks, you know, dark, brown skin, dark hair, they don't know where they're from. They could be from Guatemala, they could be from Mexico. So everybody gets rounded up when you just got a big net. And so, you know, right now I think people, you know, attorneys, communities, faith-based people are really now trying to see how they're going to stop that wave from happening. And some people have declared their cities sanctuary cities. So I think we need to be looking at what happens in our city, our state, because I thought it was a bit humorous that when some of these people were running for statewide office, they talked about, I'm protecting the border, as if Missouri is on the border of Mexico. And I'm thinking, well, did I miss the geography lesson here? What?
Right. Well, it's about capturing those same people who want to be a part of that.
Exactly.
Right?
That was part of the national narrative. So yeah, you get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that in reference to as far as I think that the language that you use, like the 2025, right? A lot of these people don't believe. I don't think that they actually believe most of the stuff that's in there. And it's always the rhetoric that's around it that actually scares people. The language that's used, the rhetoric around that language that's used. And to that point, I wanted to actually talk to you about the Organization for Black Struggle, right? And you said that that is an organization to help Black working class extol the principles of Black power. Now, when people hear Black power, they are, as you know, it's
some
like
people.
Right. When some people hear the term Black power, it's like close the door. And I think that has a lot to do with the rhetoric around the term Black power. So can you just give our audience, our listeners, like what are the principles of Black power?
So, you know, when Black people talk about Black power, they're talking about all aspects of society. So you have power in the courts, you have power in the workplace. So really, it's your human and constitutional rights. That's really all that means. That you have power to move as a full-fledged citizen, as opposed to a second-class citizen. So Black power just opens up the mind and the heart to the various possibilities of what could exist if people were fully empowered. So if you could be the person that you really wanted to be without all of the ceilings that's going to be on you as a Black woman, as a working class woman, all of that is kind of keeps people at a certain place. And so when you really want to talk about potential and a society that's going to help you meet your full potential, all these barriers are going to have to be dismantled. And so when you talk about Black power, that is the power to make sure that those systems are not there. And I don't think Black power probably is used as much as it was in the 60s and probably early 70s. And some of it is not that people stop believing in it, but I think the language gets so usurped and so vilified.
Yes. Right, and that's what I'm talking about, the vilification of the term Black Power.
Yeah,
right?
But it happens oftentimes with other, for example, when people talk about abortion rights, that the pro-life people will say y'all against life, and therefore they claim the term pro-life. Well,
right.
folks who believe in abortions are also pro-life, but they just believe in the woman's right to choose.
Right.
So they already have garnered that and taken that particular. But a lot of people will say I'm pro-life too. I believe in abortion rights, but I'm also pro-life.
Exactly.
But then you will have some people who are anti-abortion, but are pro-death penalty. So then, of course, so like how
do you
we
hold those two
right?
ideas
Yeah, right.
in your
If you
head?
pro-life for everybody, everybody,
We're gonna kill the baby if the baby does anything.
If that baby that you wanted to get born grows up without the necessary things that a kid needs, and now he's in the prison system and he kills somebody, now you're saying put him to death.
Right.
So I think part of it being in this society means you stand on principle, and you stand on principle no matter what.
Yeah.
So.
I think that in the end, it's always these terms. A lot of times, like you said, they're vilified, but it's simple, right? It's not about Black power like people say white power. It's not that. It's empowerment of Black people, just like you empower any marginalized community. So
right.
And going in further into this idea that you were talking about as far as being pro-life, pro-choice, and so forth, you describe yourself as a radical feminist. What is a radical feminist?
So I think a radical feminist is a person who feels very strongly about their feminist ideology, and feminism is just means that you believe that women have, all of the should have all the rights that anybody else in the society have. That the whole gender and sexual role that people want to categorize for the mere purpose of exploitation, whether it be sexually, economically, or whatever. But for me to really advance the fact that I am a woman in a society, and I want you to treat me as a human in a society, regardless of if I'm pro-choice, regardless if I'm, abolitionist, that you see my worth as a female. And it also means that I'm going to be working hard to make sure those systems that oppress particularly women are dismantled and transformed, so that that women themselves can reach their full potential. And that's not just for Black women, that's for women, period, because when you look at the role of capitalism in this society, whether it be in antebellum South, women didn't have any rights, they couldn't vote, they couldn't own property. So this is not just for Black women, but because we're at the bottom of that ladder, every piece of oppression which pushes us down, down, down. So I'm just radical, meaning getting to the roots of why women are oppressed.
Mm-hmm. Right, like we were talking about, that's kind of like that intersectionality, right? Since you're Black and a woman, like those two things come together and create further oppression.
Yeah.
So I know that many white feminists have talked about some of the misogyny of the movement. As a woman in the movement at that time, would you agree that that there was some misogyny in the movement in the 60s?
So I'm going to say there was obviously misogyny, but I'm going to say I think it was more patriarchy and sexism. And that was because basically men are taught that, women need to be, seen and not heard. They don't need to be expressing themselves. They definitely can't be making decisions. So when you look at pictures of the 60s and 70s and maybe even some of the 80s, you see like pictures of men in authority, Black men in particular. And, you had people like Ella Baker, like, no, what is this? We back here licking stamps and we can't vote on something. So I think there was always this push, like, what what's our role going to be? And folks didn't take it lightly that they were not going to be in decision-making places when the movement, they were a part of it just as everybody else was, and sometimes a more vital part of it. And I would say for women, that definitely was the case. And even in the Black Power movement, I mean, there was patriarchy in the Black Panthers. When I looked at pictures, when we did the 50th anniversary of the National Black Political Convention in Gary a couple of years ago, all the pictures are men. Mm-hmm. And somebody said, well, weren't you there? I mean, you say you can't even like point to women. You had like, Amiri Baraka, you had like Diggs, you had, so it looked like those were the folks who were doing it, but there was a whole army of people, particularly women, that were making that happen. And so I would even say women they were definitely discriminated against and put in their place, but so were LGBTQ people. I mean, one of the things, like, Bayard was like, no, this might not be the time for you, but he was probably one of the greatest strategists of the civil rights movement. But yet he had to be pushed aside for fear that a homosexual in the leadership would be not just rebuked by white people, but black people as well. Because coming out of black church, there's a lot of homophobia coming out of that. So he had to play a role that I think did not utilize his full gifts to the movement. Okay. He did a lot of it behind the scene, but when it came to the Big Six who planned the Washington March on Washington, he visibly could not be there. And I think that's always going to be a stain on the civil rights movement, that and some other things, but yeah. So if you got a movement and it's about all the people got to be there.
Right.
All of them have to have a voice. They have to have a role in the decision making.
So you were involved in working with a lot of these people, like Angela Davis and Amiri Baraka and Karenga. Who were some of your greatest influences in the movement?
So that's a tricky question. In fact, I think it is a trick question. Okay. Because
I'm not trying to trick you though.
Yeah, no, I'm joking. Because there can never be one person that's really helping to develop you. I mean, all along the way, from the time I was 16 and 17, like there's people like, pushing you in the direction, challenge you on different issues. And then when you come into the movement, I just think that elders see young people in a certain way, and when they see potential, they definitely like glob on to say, yeah, we're glad you're here, and this is what you need to be doing. And so we always, had an ear to the people who were movers and shakers, like what are we supposed to do, and always got a fairly good answer. So I think all of them were really inspirational in their own way. I didn't really get a chance to physically meet like Angela Davis and Kathleen Cleaver till 1990s when we had the founding of the Black Radical Congress, and they came to be a part of the founding. But other than that, I was like reading about them, never thought I would ever get a chance to meet them. But the contributions they made, I was always clear about what those were. And so I think the women in the movement are always more inspirational, but I've been touched by a lot of different people, and sometimes not even just like illustrious people, like just everyday people that who are struggling and who are inspirational. It's just so much around you that just keeps you going, which is always the second question, like what keeps you going? And it is those people, those everyday people that triumphed on the job, or came through a particular health crises, and steady fighting. And so that's really the fighting spirit is what I can appreciate.
So what would you say exactly, how did the movement change you as a person? You started out very young, right? You were even before you really went to college, you had things going on. Then in college, you became more and more involved. How did it change you as a person?
I don't know that it changed me as a person. I think it developed me in a certain way that allowed me to be a better person, a better fighter for human rights. But I think the basic kind of values I always had, probably from my family. So I believe you got to do people right.
Yes.
Okay, so if I really believe that and I see somebody doing wrong or I see a system doing wrong, then I'm obligated to stand up and say something, stand up for fight to change that. So I think that probably the most significant thing associated with your question is that at a certain point, I said, this has got to be my life's work. So that would be the difference rather than like, here's my career and here's what I'm going to be doing. But the fight for human rights, particularly for Black people, that's where I'm staking my flag. And that's where I've been for over 50 years.
And was it a turning point that made you make that decision?
So I think, there's always a series of things, but I think the burning in the belly was already there because I'm asking questions like, why is this, why is this? But I think during the rebellion in Kansas City when I was in high school and seeing what was happening and why was a turning point, because then that's when I was able to see, the National Guard come into my neighborhood. There were actually deaths. Folks were killed during that uprising. So I'm like, wow, this is the U.S. government coming in doing this to my community. And so that was the turning point, I think. If something else had happened differently, maybe I would have went and not be as radical and as consistent. But, when you see that and you feel it, it does have an impact.
So now you're a part of OBS and then also the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression. You're the chair of that one, right? And how did your organization show up around, after Mike Brown was killed?
So I know one of the first things that happened that I got a text from a young person who was saying, I'm here in Ferguson, what should I be doing? I was not totally into social media, but apparently social media was blowing up. And I said, I'm thinking, was I supposed to be a meeting out there in Ferguson and now you're looking for me? And that's when I found out about Mike Brown. So I think the immediate thing was to go there to offer support for the family and the community, but also to really start organizing what the outrage was going to look like, because it was plenty of it. And I would say for the first 3-4 days, maybe longer, it really was just keeping the angry young people contained on the streets before, so that nothing would happen to them. Because in my head, I was kept thinking, I've been through this before, and people were dead, and I don't want that to happen, because there was so much anger by young people, young Black men, because they kept saying that could have been me, and they're right. There's nothing that really predict that it could not be them, and so and then we started to figure out how do we get control the media, that make sure the media is talking to the right folks, and so they needed training. So there was some training going on. There was training around civil disobedience. There was training around medical assistance, and so people were pouring in different supplies that we needed from really all over the country. So we had to identify a place, and it was Reverend Pearson's church. I'm blanking on the name, but that became one of the headquarters for people to go get food, shelter, respite, from, and also there were trainings that were taking place. So I think one thing that young people don't understand that it's going to take more than protests. So somebody has to be developing what's going to be the demands, what's going to be the strategy to say, what do we need from this? They got the energy to stay out there and whoop, 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 but somebody's got to be thinking more strategically about what do we want this to look like after all this dies down, and it will die down. And I'm proud to say that it didn't die down as soon as people thought it would, because now it's one of the longest protest in modern history.
Oh, really?
So it went over 100 days because we were waiting for the decision from McCullough about whether or not there was going to be charges against Darren Wilson. So then that was another that was another wave of anger. So I think it's you see where folks are, and you assess the situation. And I just knew by the intensity of the rage, I said, this is not going to be over in 3 or 4 days, because people kept saying, oh, this is going to be over. I said, no, it's not. And so how do you know? I said, you can, I know, I'm just, you can feel it. And also just, you've been through it before, you know. But, you talked about some of the changes that happened after Ferguson. But there were also some changes that sort of was taken back. So, for example, one of the things that people were really hot about was, why is it that most of these municipalities, 1/3 of their general revenue was coming from these citations, these tickets, these nonviolent pieces? And that was implicit in the way that their policies were even written. So one of the things that the DOJ found out is some of the police departments were actually telling officers, when you go, you better come back with more than one citation. So a lot of times folks had 4, 5, 6 citations, and each one of those was going to be a court, fines, and all of that. So that's why it ballooned to being 1/3 of the budget. So part of the proposed legislation was that, bring that ceiling down. You can't be doing this off of Black people's bodies. And so that about 12 pieces of proposed legislation. Well, then only one of those passed, and it was challenged by the courts. And so then that was, so it's you just have to try to tell young people, this is a process that you got to stay engaged with, because when you're not looking, they'll revert back to the default, and the default is what you got already. So, but sometimes it's hard for you to understand how the system works, because you feel like they saw what happened, just like I did. Why come they're not doing anything?
Right.
So that's part of a different kind of education. But I think young people, when you see them moving away from voting, moving away from participating, I mean, these are some of the reasons why. Yeah, it's like, why? I did this and nothing happened. I tried to do this and nothing's happening. So I think there is a sort of malaise, and it's not really just young people. When I look at the numbers of people who didn't vote in the November election, it's in the millions. And so why is it that we're supposed to be a democratic country that we don't have citizens, and we're not concerned about our citizens not voting, where people are lined up overnight in other places just anxious to vote. Anxious to have their
showing
voice.
their fingers with the ink on it. I voted.
So it is a different kind of thing, and I think people have been mashed down and pushed down, and then you got all these barriers about voting. Can't vote on Sunday, can't do this, can't do this, you gotta have a voter ID. I mean, really? This is where we go with this?
You gotta have a driver's license and so forth.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. You're talking about that. You're basically saying how easy it is basically to become apathetic because you believe, there's not any real growth, right? With this being your life's work. You say you put your stake down. This is my life's work. How do you feel about that? How do you continue to just keep fighting?
So my thing is not you keep fighting. You keep fighting based on the conditions. And I think sometimes people just think you do the same thing every time, but you can't. So we're getting ready to go into what I think is a period of real repression for this country that folks have not seen. Earlier you said that people don't believe what's in Project 2025. And I don't know why, because as I said, some of it has already been rolled out. I mean, one of the things that's in there is control of the courts. So even when you look at the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, if you were to take something there that was going to transform the way that a particular area or law worked, and now you got it stacked, well, that change is not going to come. It's going to be very different from the 60s when you had a Thurgood Marshall bench. And so what you see happen is the gates are shutting, the windows are closing, and you'll have very little access to getting grievances and getting laws changed. So one of the things I think about is like, how are we going to organize ourselves differently in this next period? So it's not going to be like just going out there like protesting. Like, it's going to be some serious stuff we have to worry about, like what harm is going to be done to people who are out there fighting, because now all of a sudden they're enemy combatants and they're the enemy within. It's the same thing that happened with the Panthers. Okay, now you're going to have a label on you, and you'll be detained indefinitely. A friend of mine just sent me an email this morning that said his nephew was convicted and given like something like 40 years with no evidence, no gun, and no nothing. And so he's out of it for 40 years. And so you'll start to see more of that happening. It's like people with these, false charges, and the courts, you take it to the court, you don't have money for so it's going to be that kind of a thing. So how are we going to educate our people differently about how to fight, how to take care of themselves? Because the violence, the level is going to increase. I mean, the fact that you had Brian Thompson shot down in cold blood, because somebody's angry about the system. Now here's somebody that was privileged that's angry. What do you think about the folks who really can't get health care?
Right.
Yeah, so they're angry too, as people saw the vitriol that came with that shooting. Like, everybody's got a story about the health
They
care.
said that when United Healthcare put out just kind of like the little thing, in honor to Ryan, thank you for serving us, this is that, we're sorry we lost them. 90,000 people put a laugh out loud emoji on there. I was like,
and I think that was in the first like 40 minutes or something. But again, I was like, you have this anger, this simmering, and something happens and like, see good. But is that the way we want to live in a civilized society, where we're going to be rooting for people who kill somebody? So that's the thing that I think is most disturbing to me, that people so quickly went to that. Even good people who consider themselves Christian, like, yeah, he got what he deserved. But who there is a process that people don't think is working. The process is like, I've been grieved. The insurance company, I've been paying every month for years. Now I need a claim because I need some significant medical treatment, and I get denied. And the policy is to deny. And United Healthcare had the highest rate of denial of any of the other insurance companies. And so why would they not then become a target? And so, but we, including the we meaning also the people in United Healthcare, knew what the policies were. Those stakeholders, these folks are half a $1 trillion. That's what they were worth. And so we see in this, but we don't know exactly how to fight it. And so we just shut down. But that just gives people the leeway to just go hog wow. And so I think we have to encourage people to find out where you can put some energy. And this is going to be my mantra for the year. Find your people that can work with you. And we don't have the luxury in 2025 of just sitting back, complaining, being on social media, throwing up. No, we got to be more active, more proactive. And we got to save the democracy, because we're a part of it.
So we'll close out there. Basically, Jamala Rogers said, find your people.
Find your people.
Find your people, work with them, And because right now we have to save the democracy. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah.